What if I told you that at one point there existed an alternative version to this story?
Okay.
That in addition to the version we have in Matthew and in Luke, at one point there existed another version of the story that's been preserved in fragment in the Church Fathers. We no longer have this document, but we have it quoted from by a Church Father, Eusebius. Remember him? Eusebius, the church historian, reports a version of this parable which was known from the so-called Gospel of the Nazoreans, a heretical Ebionite version of Matthew. Now, the Ebionites were very poor. We have no manuscript of this gospel. All we have are quotations and allusions to it by some church fathers and a few later writings. This gospel, the Gospel of the Nazoreans, is customarily considered a 2nd century translation of Matthew from Greek back into Aramaic. At the time when people handled it, they thought maybe this was what Matthew did. Matthew first wrote in Aramaic, and then it was written in Greek. But we know that couldn't be true. Q was written in Greek by the time Matthew got a hold of it. So see, this is the thing. If you don't have the benefit of critical scholarship, which develops much later, because this is the argument I keep getting given by people. I trust the church fathers because they were closer to the time. Well, I think respecting and honoring as part of our heritage the church fathers' writings is very important. But folks, if you're living in the 4th century and you don't have critical scholarship of documents written in the 2nd century, follow? Don't think because you're only 200 years away that somebody 2,000 years away with critical scholarship and global scholarship and all these peer-reviewed sources and tools, don't think that you have an advantage. You may not have an advantage without those tools. So proximity in years doesn't. That's a very popular misunderstanding. It's a very popular misunderstanding. So the thought of many church fathers was that maybe this document should be respected and not thought of as all heretical because, hey, it's in Aramaic. So that must mean it must be older. I could see why they'd think that, but not necessarily. It could go from Jesus' Aramaic sayings to Greek collection of those sayings to a Greek narrative gospel, Matthew, and then Aramaic-speaking people get a hold of it. We don't understand Greek. All right, let's have one of our scribes translate it in reverse back into Aramaic. A few hundred years go by, and that community has disappeared, but other Christians now have the document. They go, oh, this is an earliest version of Matthew we have. It's the so-called Gospel of the Nazoreans. But anyway, so only Eusebius preserves this fragment. Quote, but since the gospel, this is Eusebius writing, written in Hebrew characters, he means Aramaic, which has come into our hands, entered the threat not against the man who had hid the talent, but against him who had lived dissolutely. For he, now he starts quoting the story, for he, the master, had 3 servants. He breaks down the story, I should say. A, one who squanders his master's substance with harlots and flute girls. Huh? B, one who multiplied the gain. And C, and one who hid the talent and accordingly, C prime, one was accepted with joy. B, another merely rebuked. And A, and another cast into prison. I wonder, Eusebius writes, whether in Matthew, the canonical version, the canonical text we have, which is in Greek, the threat which is uttered after the word against the man who did nothing, pay attention to the colors, may not refer to him, but by epanalipsis, look at the pattern, to the first who had feasted and drunk with the drunken. Okay, let me break that down for you. Those of you who were here when we studied John last Wednesday, we talked about how there's step parallelism. The middle point is always the most important point, right? Look at the step parallelism. That's not a pattern of 7, that's a pattern of 6. So A goes with, right? B goes with, right? And C goes with. So try to understand, the one, in this version of the story, you got 3 servants. That comes from the original story. But when the Ebionites or whoever, the Nazoreans, when they got a hold of this story, they did a few things to it. One, they made one of the servants waste the master's money with harlots and flute girls. That's A, and it's parallel. The other one dishonorably multiplies the gain, who he's rebuked. And then the other, who hid the talent and gets accepted with joy, he's rewarded. Now, we know that in Matthew's version, this was based on the Greek of Matthew, so it was changed. But Eusebius has a problem. Eusebius is looking at this, Eusebius of Caesarea, right? He lives in this area. And he thinks like the people do, although he's an elite who can write. And he's like, wow, let's look at this. Why is our canonical version in Matthew, right, have the story one way, in which the third servant gets punished, but we have this other gospel, which we don't accept, but it's got this one story, and it seems to be more logical. The one who did the honorable thing is honored. Eusebius seems to have been troubled by canonical version of the story found in the canonical Gospel Matthew. On the basis of the version that he knew from the Gospel of the Nazarenes, Eusebius identifies the first servant in Matthew with the dissolute one from that Gospel. For this behavior, the dissolute one, the first servant, is thrown into prison. Neither Matthew nor Luke make this servant somebody who wastes money on whores and flute girls. But in the Gospel of the Nazarenes, he did. The second servant, who only increased his master's money, is merely rebuked. Yet neither the author of the Gospel of the Nazarenes nor Eusebius applauds this servant. It is rather the servant who hid the talent who is praised. He held fast to his beliefs despite fearing his master. He behaved honorably with the trust and returned it safe and sound to his master. In the final analysis, everything depends on how one views the master and the third servant's comments about him. Knowing the master to be an exacting man, the third servant reasoned that he had better act honorably than risk losing the master's money. Peasants hearing this story would applaud that servant's decision and behavior. Is the master angry with the servant? In Matthew and Luke, yes. And probably in Jesus' original version of the story, yes. Assuredly so. But the question is was it appropriate to be angry with the honorable servant? Elites in the audience, hearing Jesus tell it, would say yes. But peasants in the audience, like Jesus, would say no. Peasants would say that the peasant artisan turned folk healer, Jesus, is warning greedy elites about their unwarranted reactions to Torah-based peasant behavior. The master in the parable did indeed condemn the third servant. But did Jesus